There was a time, more than 2 millennia ago, when Europe was in the hands of barbarians. Hordes of primitive warriors who lived in wooden huts, hunted wild boar, and worshipped nature. This is the image of the Celtic people, fashioned by history. Behind these cliches lies the reality of a true civilization that dominated Europe more than 5 centuries before our time, and who left a profound impression on the history of the continent. Who were the Celts really? Where did they live? What was their culture? Thanks to the progress made in archaeology, the history of the Celts is emerging from the earth. Throughout Europe, new excavations are uncovering vestiges of a world that is still largely unknown. Discoveries abound, leading researchers along unexpected paths that contradict some previous notions. Celtic culture is proving to be much vaster and more sophisticated than ever imagined. In eastern France, Champagne is among the regions that are scheduled to build a new TGV line, this one between Paris and Nancy. But for the moment, this enormous trench that cuts through these fields belongs to the archaeologists. They are looking for signs of ancient dwellings in soil unearthed by shovel and backhoe. Today, it's the work sites on highways and train lines that have become prime sources of information about the past. Especially since these modern lines of communication follow very old paths of migration and settlement, trod by the Celts. Have they left signs of civilization across this 400-kilometer stretch of eastern France? This is what a major archaeological survey hopes to learn. A freezing fog hovers over the fields of Champagne. How will it be possible to find traces of men who lived 2,500 years ago here in fields that have been worked for centuries? On ground that is constantly drenched by rain, the task seems as daunting as it is impossible. Attentive to even the slightest clue, the scientists progress meter by meter. The task is to identify sites that will be marked for major excavation. 1 month later, in the deep of winter, the archaeologists are back. This is one of the approved sites, and it has been entrusted to a team of specialists headed by archaeologist Lola Bonabet. What she is looking for are graves. A trace of brown suddenly uncovered by the backhoe signals a displacement of earth that is clearly ancient. It could be a burial site, or simply a hole created by farm work.
J'ai l'impression.
Little by little, a skeleton hidden only a few centimeters below the surface emerges into daylight. Around its neck, there is a torque, and there are bracelets on the wrists. For the archaeologist, there is no doubt that it is a Celt, or more precisely, a female Celt. This grave suggests that a necropolis lies nearby. But before pursuing a dig, Lola wants to situate her discovery somewhere on the continuum of a story that covers more than 5 centuries before Christ.
J'ai tout un tas de cochonneries. Alors.
On est sur le tracé du TGV.
We're on the trench of the
Et on est, on va dire,
TGV and
sur
the
la
eastern
limite
limits of the chalk
orientale de la
plain.
plaine crieuse. D'ailleurs, après, on en a plus
André
de ce
Rapin
type de
is an undisputed expert
sépulture,
of
là.
Celtic metallurgy. He is capable of dating an object to within a few dozen years by its style.
Le torque.
Here, the verdict is immediate.
Voilà, donc c'est un torque, tu vois, donc
So it's
malgré
a
les
torque,
apparences,
despite appearances,
il a
and it has
une
a twisted
torsade.
cable.
Alors donc, à la
The difference
différence des
being that the
torsades
twists
qui
are
sont
very
très serrés,
tight in
pour tout ce
objects
qui est
that
donc
date to the
de
5th
ses
century
ancêtres du 5e
BC,
siècle, là c'est
and
une
here it is a
torsade
light cable
lâche,
with
disons,
a
avec
few
quelques
slight
faibles tours.
turns.
Mais il a quand même
But it has nevertheless
donc
maintained the
conservé
characteristics
aussi
of the
les
torques of the
caractéristiques
beginning of
de
the
ces
4th
torques
century
du
torque,
début du
with
4e siècle, à
cone-shaped
savoir
ends.
une extrémité en tampon conique.
So it is, even so,
Donc
a
c'est quand même
4th
un torque
century torque.
4e.
D'accord, on est encore dans le
Okay, so
4e.
we're still in the
Ok.
4th century.
Ouais, en
Actually,
fait,
I wouldn't have
je
imagined
m'étais
so
pas
because of the
imaginé à
bracelet.
cause du bracelet.
You see, I would have thought it was more
Alors,
Oui, j'aurais
recent.
pensé que c'était plus récent, en fait.
Voilà, donc ça c'est toujours
There,
la même
so it's still the
sépulture,
same
c'est
burial
une
plot,
dame.
it's the
Voilà.
same lady.
Alors ces parures donc à
So
trois
these ornamentations
petits
with
bosses
3 little
sur le
bumps on the
parcours,
surround
ce
are
sont
also
des
embellishments
caractéristiques
characteristic of the
aussi
4th
du
century.
siècle.
So
Donc, elle a
she
eu
certainly
certainement
had the
le
torque
bracelet
and the
à peu près en
bracelet
même
at the
temps.
same time in
Dans le dernier
the
tiers,
last
dernier
third
quart
or
du
last
4e
quarter of the 4th century.
Okay,
Bon,
maybe
si
it's
c'était
just
quand
that
même
she
avoir
has
le
her
bracelet de sa
grandmother's
grand-mère.
bracelet.
Ça,
I don't believe that at all.
Bon,
Well,
d'accord.
okay.
No, because there are too many instances of
de
convergence.
cas de convergence.
Ornamentations are like
Oui,
coats
c'est
of
une
arms.
association
They
qui
are an
s'appelle.
individual signature, their social history, etc. So there really isn't much in the way of heritage in
Il n'y a pas
them.
tellement d'héritage dans cette affaire-là.
Worn by both men and women, the torque distinguished the elite within Celtic society. But its shape, and at times very rich decoration, signaled membership in a clan or tribe. The torque identified its owner and was worn throughout one's life. It was a talisman of the warrior that would protect him during combat. It is even a sign of the gods, as is witnessed by the very rare human representations of the Celtic divinities. In the field, Lola Bonnabel's team has gone back to work. Very soon, a second tomb is uncovered. This time, the individual, seemingly of a more modest station, wears no ornamentation. But in the third grave, the deceased once again reveals signs of aristocracy.
Le premier coup de bêche que j'ai donné ici, j'ai trouvé une moitié de mandibule. Et tu sais, c'est aussi en plan, en surface où il y a eu la figure.
Ouais.
Just as Lola predicted, the discoveries mount. Here, in the middle of a field, under constant threat by the plough, a Celtic necropolis has survived 23 centuries of history. This last-minute rescue operation provides vital information about the ancient population of this region of France. It is, in fact, the third Celtic necropolis the TGV line has crossed within a few dozen kilometers.
Avec une opération comme le
With an
TGV, on a
operation
quelque
like
chose
the
qui fonctionne comme une espèce
TGV, we have
d'immense
something
sondage
like
en
an
fait
immense
sur
survey
toute
of
une
an
région
entire geographic
géographique.
region that
Et donc
documents in
ça
a
donne
very
ça
interesting and
documente vraiment de
continuous
manière
way
tout à fait
human
intéressante et
settlements in the
continue
different
les
sectors.
occupations humaines sur les différents secteurs. Et là, il y a
Here
effectivement
we
quelque
have
chose
something
qui
that has
ressort, qui est le
emerged
premier
bearing the
résultat
first
très
really
important,
important
c'est qu'on a une
result,
très grande
which is a
quantité
large
de
number of
nécropoles sur
necropoli in
cette
the
zone
chalky
de la
plains of
plaine
Champagne.
crayeuse champenoise.
So we know something
Donc il y a
really
quelque
took
chose qui
place
s'est
in that
passé effectivement
period.
à cette période-là.
How can we discover more about the daily lives of the Celts? What were their homes like? How did they spend their days? These questions are best pursued from a different vantage point than the trenches carved in advance of the TGV. There is another method that makes it possible to answer these questions: aerial archaeology. Patterns that sometimes appear in fields during the spring are signs of communities created by man in ancient times. The boundaries of settlements in which Celtic communities lived are clearly delineated. These observations, together with terrestrial digs, make it possible to reconstruct their buildings and to imagine their way of life. Houses were vast, solid wooden structures covered with thatch. The abundance of farms signifies the prevalence of a productive agrarian society. The farms include several buildings such as barns, stables, and grain silos, mounted on pylons to protect them from rodents. These Celts were not a primitive band of hunter-gatherers. These were men and women who lived a comfortable existence, essentially focused on agriculture and the raising of livestock. At the Archaeological Centre of Montbeauvray, information on the most recent digs is collected for study. Here, historians correct the accounts of the past and reconstruct the image of the Celtic people. But they also find themselves confronted by a world that is proving more and more complex and which spawns new questions.
When I was young, they said, things are simple. There have been different populations that succeeded one another from prehistory right up to the Iron Age, I don't know what. And around 500, 450 BC, the Celts arrived. Like that, the Celts arrived. They came out of nowhere, and there they are. And then civilization changed. There were new instruments, right? We know now that this is false, but it's an acquisition of not even one generation. Now we know that with the Celts, some arrived earlier in certain areas than others, but when? We don't know. And we are especially aware of the complexity of the phenomenon. There weren't Celts. There was a series of peoples who probably shared a common origin, but who went in all directions, including the Mediterranean and Asia Minor as well.
What was the extent of the Celtic world? How far away can we trace their civilization? Their path resurfaces today in Hungary, on the eastern extreme of Europe. Here, trucks crisscross the Great Plains of Pannonia, as far as the Carpathian Basin. Construction of a network of highways is underway. Archaeologists must explore the terrain before the motorway covers it for good. They are hoping these excavations will yield traces of Celtic peoples who came from Central Asia. After months of digging, archaeologist Miklas Zabul shares the results with colleagues.
Our site is there, and not far away, the Misklach Museum has dug up another necropolis from the 3rd century. So there are a lot of Celtic traces in this zone from the 3rd century on. What we find here are a lot of calcium fragments for pig iron. So there are signs of mining activity. What needs to be understood is that we're not far from the mountains here, where there are deposits of iron and copper. So it's a site that was very well chosen for the Celtic period.
Archaeologists like Miklas feel that much can be learned about the settlements of the Eastern Celts from evidence found here, provided that one knows where to look. Most of the clues are trapped in blocks of earth that come from the necropolis. The deceased were cremated. All that remains of them are their teeth and any metal ornaments they had worn in death. Forensic analysis of these finds is carried out in Hungarian laboratories. After careful sampling, the pieces are cleaned and protected against oxidation. A fibula and a fragment of a buckle are the latest discoveries that mirror the finds from sites in Western Europe. But some of these ancient artifacts seem particularly significant to Miklós Szabó. This vase was also buried in the necropolis. It's an extremely fragile piece that requires painstaking restoration. It is the style of the handles that particularly interest Miklós. At this stage, it's hard to say what they represent. After several weeks of work, the archaeologist will find out if the result confirms his theories during the dig. The figure is treated in a style that is entirely specific to this region. The form of the muzzle and the teeth identify the piece as a wild boar. A symbol of strength and courage, the wild boar is one of the emblematic figures of the Celtic world. This discovery confirms the existence of an original school of Celtic culture. A new community that distinguishes itself by the style of its creations.
There are zones that were completely unknown for the Celtic period, such as the Hungarian plains. And now, thanks to new finds, we can say that the Carpathian Basin became a new centre of Celtic civilization in the 3rd century.
Similar discoveries all over Europe make it possible today to better grasp the extent of the Celtic world. From the depths of Western Europe, the Celts truly began their expansion in the 5th century BC. They established themselves beyond the Rhine in the Danube basin and descended towards Aquitaine and Italy in successive waves. They made contact with other civilizations of the ancient world. The Greeks call them Celts, the Romans call them Gauls, but all of them describe the same people who were in the process of conquering Europe. At their height between the 3rd and 1st centuries BC, the Celts were made up of hundreds of tribes that spread from the Atlantic to the mouth of the Danube and from the North Sea to the Mediterranean. At the heart of this phenomenal expansion was the Celtic warrior. He dominated the battlefields for centuries. But what was his secret? What made him such a legend? Today, it's possible to answer these questions. Studies conducted by specialist André Rapin in the field of armaments reveal a technological sophistication unsuspected until now.
The Celts, at the time of their greatest expansion in Europe, had developed equipment that was very high level for antiquity. And so it isn't by chance that at that time there was a territorial expansion that went from Turkey to the Atlantic and from England to the center of Italy, Iberia, etc. Each component, sword, scabbard, lance, helmet, were given a very specific mix of metal, of steel with varying degrees of carbon, of iron, and of sheet metal that was very malleable. They were ahead of everyone else in iron technology at the time.
De la technologie du fer à l'époque. ni les Romains,
Neither the Romans nor the Greeks knew how to make metal scabbards,
qui sont donc des choses
which
très
are
difficiles à
things that
réaliser.
are very
Ces
difficult to
gouttières un peu
produce.
ruinées que vous avez ici
These
sont
grooves
destinées
here,
à
which are a
pincer
bit worn,
de part et d'autre les
were made to
tranchants de
guide the
l'épée
sharp
en
edge
laissant le
of the
fil
sword,
naviguer à l'intérieur du tube de
allowing the edge
sertissage
to
des deux
float
plaques
inside
du
the
fourreau
two gutters of
et à
the
un
scabbard
millimètre
to
près
within a
sans que
millimeter
le fil ne
without
s'émousse.
blunting the edge.
C'est une précision
It's so
qui étonne
precise that it
encore
still
les
astonishes the
forgerons
ironworkers of
actuels
today,
qui
who
s'essayent
try to
à se
reproduce these
refabriquer ces
objects,
objets-là,
as they
tellement
require
donc
such
ça exige de
precision
précision
and
et de
mastery.
maîtrise, non seulement de
Not
maîtrise
only does it
de
require
l'habileté,
a
mais de
mastery
maîtrise
of
au niveau de
ironworking
la
skills,
préméditation de la
it requires
fabrication
mastery
du
at the
métal
level
de
of
base qui va
predetermining
servir à
the
fabriquer
casting
tout
of the
cela.
steel to
Il y a
be
des
used to
réalisations
make all of
techniques
these
comme
things.
la chaîne, par exemple, qui est une
There are
chaîne
technical
destinée
achievements such as
à
the chain
suspendre
designed
l'épée
to
sur le
hang the
côté
sword
droit,
on the
et
right
chaque
side,
maillon est
where
conçu
each link
de
is
telle
made in
sorte
such
que
a
la
way
moindre
that even
rotation
the
vers la
slightest
droite
rotation to the
va
right
soulever
will
tout
lift
l'ensemble
everything
qui va
up
devenir
and make it stiff.
raide.
And this stiffening
ce
stops the
raidissement
sword from
va
swinging
empêcher
between the
l'épée
legs of someone
de se
who is
balancer
running
dans
as
les jambes
fast
de
as he
quelqu'un qui
can.
court le plus vite possible. Donc c'est vraiment
So it is really a system adapted to a style of combat that is completely different from the Greek hoplites or Mediterranean warriors in general, who were much more static and armored.
Et blindés, alors que le guerrier celte a développé au contraire la mobilité, la rapidité pour désorganiser les adversaires.
It was also their innovations in defensive armour that gave the Celtic warrior the advantage. The coat of mail is one of the inventions of this people. By attacking the Mediterranean world, the Celts sealed their reputation as barbarians. History recalls the surge of the Brenos warriors, 60,000 men who at the beginning of the 4th century BC crossed the Alps and made their way to Rome. The Roman troops were crushed. The city was totally devastated, burned and occupied for more than 7 months. The Celts scorn death and throw themselves into combat without concealing themselves, recounts the historian Strabo. But their strength and audacity could not withstand the strategy of the Roman legions launched in a campaign to conquer the world. Strangely, it is in dying at the hand of a sword that ensured the Celts their place in history. At the TGV work sites, the excavations are now coming to an end. But the studies of the last necropolis reveal further surprises to Lola Bonneville and her team.
Tu t'es débarrassé de tes os, là t'as encore des os qui se baladent.
The archaeologists have come across a small cache of bones, human ribs, that have withstood the ravages of time and the intrusions of man. Though they are delighted with the find, they are disappointed that the skull is missing. For it could have told them much about typical Celtic build. Valuables such as a torque are also suspiciously absent. The archaeologists think they know what happened at this site. This grave was pillaged, but what about the others? Unfortunately, the next tomb confirms Lola's suspicions. The condition in which the looters left the burial site is a signature that the archaeologist knows well.
There's absolutely nothing.
On on a le résultat
This is the typical result of a 19th century pillage. What interested them the most were the metal objects, in this case the torque, bracelet, and fibula, and so they attacked the upper part of the body. In general, with this type of tomb, we find the lower part of the body with the vases and possibly the eating utensils intact. It was a period when the Gauls were very much in fashion. It was part of a general political logic, where there's romanticism about everything that's linked with the past, to ruins, to things ancient, and also everything that's linked to national identity, arguments about political origins, and so in fact a kind of will to see the Gallic people as the real ancestors of the French.
The link between politics and history is clearly in evidence at the Museum of National Antiquities in Saint-Germain-en-Laye. Conceived by Napoleon III, who was a great partisan of the Gallic people, it houses the collections assembled in the 19th century, an ill-assorted jumble of objects glorifying the founding peoples. Curators are now rethinking the sections devoted to the history of Gaul, thanks to new discoveries from the salvage digs. A necessity which for the curator, Laurent Olivier, also reflects a change in our concerns.
Gallic and Celtic archaeology is something that specifically developed at the end of the 19th century, and in France in particular. The importance of the Gauls in the collective imagination became very important at that time. There were references to the Gauls in the origins of the French identity, so it's something that took root in the 19th century. The societies of the past were very much seen as having their own culture and their own language. Today, with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War, nations are no longer seen in a specific ethnic context as they were on the eve of the First World War, for example. Which means that the way we look at the past has changed.
New questions now lead archaeologists to the frontiers of the Celtic world. They want to know what happened in these regions where civilizations rubbed shoulders. The mountains of northern Italy. This is where Etruscan communities lived 25 centuries ago. During the same period, Celtic tribes who had crossed the Alps also visited the region. Did these cultures mix? This is what archaeologist Daniele Vitali wants to find out. He is excavating the necropolis situated in what was probably the contact zone between the Celts and the Etruscans.
Poi c'è l'asse di legno che è sopra lo scheletro. E bisogna vedere se passa sopra i vasi o se sopra i vasi.
The first tombs opened allowed Daniele to identify straight away the personal effects that accompanied the deceased on their final voyage. Pottery typical of the Etruscans confirms the presence of a community in these mountains. Hardly are they unearthed than the memory of this refined people of mysterious origins is awakened. They first appeared in the 8th century BC in Tuscany, where they founded a brilliant commercial civilization that shone on the Italian peninsula. Imported from the different regions of Etruria, these pieces bear witness to the wealth of the community that settled in this region. They also reveal all of the finesse of an art that is often figurative, richly colored. An art that also shows a certain taste for luxury and pleasure, the complete opposite of the Celtic style. How could these two cultures have mixed? The answer is in tomb number 5.
Elle est seulement une tombe des femmes.
It is surely the tomb of a woman,
donc
as there is a
un bol
skiphos,
avec
bowl
deux
with two
anses
handles,
qui est
that is
typique
typical
des
of
tombes des
women's
femmes. On
tombs.
ne les trouve jamais
These
dans
are
les
never
tombes des
found in
hommes.
men's tombs.
L'immobilier est
The
assez
property
complexe,
is rather
donc il y a un
complex.
vase,
There
un
are
grand vase
some
pour
vases that contain
frotter
wine,
les du vin.
and there are bowls,
Et puis il y a des
goblets,
bols, des
and
gobelets,
plates with all
des
kinds of
assiettes
food
avec beaucoup
offerings.
d'offrandes alimentaires.
And so it is a rich
Donc c'est un
property.
mobilier riche. Et l'élément
And the
unique,
element that is
c'est qu'elle a un
unique
fibule
is that there is a
celtique.
Celtic fibula.
Donc
So
il
it is
faudrait
really
savoir
important to
pourquoi.
know why.
C'est
These
toutes
are
des questions
questions
qui
that
restent
remain
ouvertes.
open.
C'est l'étude qui
It
va
is the global
globale de la
study of the
nécropole
necropolis
qui
that
ira
will
nous
give
donner
us
des
the
réponses.
answers.
The first clue is a small one, but it shows that there was contact with the Celts. Others must be found to prove that there was a true cultural mix. This discovery invigorates the excavation and justifies the use of greater means in their search. The team decides to strip off a large section of earth around the fifth tomb. It is Voncherino who operates the excavator. A former shepherd, Voncherino has spent half his life walking around these mountains. One day in the 1950s, he discovered a necropolis that revealed the archaeological riches of the region. He has been interested in ancient history ever since, and has developed a singular gift for finding tombs. It is this mysterious gift of divining that he puts to work for Daniele's research. Once again, it appears that the shepherd has guessed correctly. These stones could come from a tomb constructed in a specific way. After 2 days of digging, a Celtic warrior with all his armor is unearthed, thanks to Daniele. Sword, scabbard, lance points, and javelin. This time, the discovery is decisive.
Les Étrusques,
the Etruscans that we know very well on full plains and in Tyrrhenian Etruria never or almost never had the cultural habit of funerary rites of placing arms with the deceased. And so the introduction of arms in funerary furnishings is a break with respect to previous traditions. And from the point of view of the time coincidence, we know that from the 4th century they were Celts in Italy, that they arrived with their arms that distinguished them immediately as warriors. The display of weapons is exactly the same as what we find in the necropolis that are verifiably Celtic to the north of the Alps, and that are accompanied by Etruscan effects. We can deduce from this that there were marriages between the local Etruscans and the newly arrived Celts.
L'élément local étrusque et les nouveaux arrivés, les Celtes.
The weapons, twisted and attacked by rust, are very fragile. Extracted with infinite care, they are immediately taken away for restoration. Celtic arms found in tombs are always sacrificed as they belong to only one warrior all his life. No matter how beautiful the object, it is deformed and hammered to the point of being useless. Here, in Etruscan territory, the Celtic rites are respected and indicate a union of cultural traditions, even in death. It's the consummation of a cultural marriage.
On sait qu'à une époque très très ancienne,
we know that a long time ago, so-called temperate Europe was in contact with Mediterranean Europe as well as the countries to the north.
On connaît la fameuse route de l'Ambre, par exemple.
We know of the famous Amber route, for example, and we know of the exchanges that took place with the Etruscans or with the Greeks. So you see that there is already a framework that, contrary to what has been previously thought till now, shows us a Celtic world that was very much integrated in its exchanges. And for that world, it has been perhaps 10 or 15 years that we have begun to understand its diversity, its complexity, and also its importance.
It is in Hungary once again that traces of the cultural intermingling that thrived in this period of the European continent appear. Proof of the marriage between the Celtic and Etruscan cultures, revealed by Daniele, resurface here in the form of a bracelet with fabulous decoration. Recently discovered in the necropolis of the Carpathian Basin, it has just come back from being restored. So what is the history that Miklas Szabo reads in these motifs?
The Celts of the 4th century learned many things from Italy. Because there was contact with Etruscan studios, and there were even Italo-Celtic studios whose Etruscan vegetation motifs were adapted by the Celts of the 4th century. Afterwards, in the 3rd century, which is when the bracelet was made, we already have an entirely autonomous usage by the Eastern Celts. So it's really very important news, because we can presume that there is a mix of cultures here. And at the same time, we can underline the importance of these zones for Celts in Europe.
The art of the Celts is still unveiling the history of its people. Today, scientists are determined to decipher the obscure and symbolic language forged by the Celtic artists. Toward what unknown world are they leading us? In the Metal Restoration Laboratory of Compiègne, work continues on the most recent find from the excavations in Champagne. It is the scabbard of a sword. X-rays have revealed the presence of decoration that is hidden by rust. These motifs, sometimes very complex, are frequent on Celtic armaments. Archaeologists found them enigmatic for a long time. What do they represent? Do they even have a meaning? By unearthing such ornaments and studying them, André Rapin has managed to penetrate some of their mysteries. The most recent finds from the salvage digs confirm his theories perfectly.
That image there of a monstrous animal was found on a scabbard in Anseroon, so very much in contact with the Iberians in a spot that was thought to be much more Iberian than Celtic. And we find the same thing in Bezace, hardly 40 kilometers from here. We're also dealing with a monstrous animal, which is to say the head of a kind of predator. But taking the whole image together, when you combine it symmetrically, also gives a reading of an individual with two eyes and a large caricature of a nose that is very comic book-like. It has an Achilles heel side to it, and we find this emblem in the form of a coat of arms, at times reproduced to within a millimeter, from one end of Europe to the other. In other words, there are norms for these images, and that is new. It is no longer decoration, but a code. And it is a code at the same time that is a bit secret. And we can readily see it is not easy to read them. They are complicated. They're designed in such a way as to disturb the reader, and so there is an esoteric side to this business.
Il y a un côté ésotérique dans cette affaire-là.
Efforts to decode the sacred art of the Celts are now underway from France to Hungary, to push open the doors of this world where gods reside.
On comprend maintenant l'iconographie celtique. Les éléments iconographiques comme le masque humain, comme les éléments végétaux, la feuille de gui, ou les éléments animaliers comme le griffon, le dragon,
or the animal elements like the griffin,
fantastique.
the dragon,
nous avons
and fantastic birds.
Un répertoire iconographique pour
All of this can help us explain Celtic representations of a religious nature.
Religieux des Celtes. Alors, si on compare
if we compare the decoration of Celtic scabbards with Greek statues,
avec la statue
either classical or Hellenistic,
classique ou hellénistique,
we can observe a fundamental difference.
Les
the Greeks represent their divinities as humans, which is something that is impossible for the Celts.
Impossible pour les Celtes, parce que pour les Celtes,
for the Celts, a divine image is a hidden image in an ambiguous representation.
Dans une représentation ambiguë, et justement,
to be
quand on regarde
when we look at the reverse side of this scabbard, we can identify the human mask, the mask of the hidden divinity, which is always present to protect the warrior in combat.
Pour protéger le guerrier dans le combat.
Unmasked, the secret face of the Celtic world suddenly seems to loom everywhere. Unsettling and solitary, like on this helmet found in northern Italy. It is displayed just as brilliantly all over this exceptional piece discovered in the southwest of France. Made of an iron base with bronze decoration, this helmet was entirely covered in gold and encrusted with coral. A ritual object, this helmet was undoubtedly never worn, but represents today one of the masterpieces of Celtic goldworking. But who was such luxury for? What power is hidden behind such ostentation? True to their game of riddles, the Celts perhaps camouflaged the answer in this piece that was designed to protect the warrior's cheeks.
It's a particularly important piece that certainly provides a part of the key to understanding the object. The decoration is extremely rich, as we can see, but more importantly, we have here this piece of gold that is in fact a coiled thread, but which represents a snake with a monstrous head with ram's horns. It has the muzzle of a carnivore, enormous nostrils, and dilated eyes. This monster appears for the first time in Celtic art, but we find it again much later in the 1st century BC on a Gundestrup cauldron, where it is held in the hand and brandished by the god Cernunnos, the god with deer horns. Considered to be a god of the underworld, one of the benevolent gods that, of course, have a role in the world of the dead, but more importantly, bring fertility. A kind of god of happiness, if we can call it that.
Originating from the mouth of the Danube across Europe, this cauldron proves the existence of gods shared by all of Celtic culture. do we know of this Celtic pantheon? From what they left behind, it was a complex world filled with a host of divinities, entwined with strange animals. The only thing that truly crossed the ages is the mystery inherent in Celtic beliefs. Once again, scientists find themselves confronted with the enigma of shapes. But when an object reveals its secret, it touches universal spheres of knowledge. This little bronze disc, found in Champagne, is one of the most mysterious objects produced by the Celts. It's an embroidered disc used to decorate the chariots of aristocrats. Is there perhaps a science to this strange geometry of motifs? If so, what is it? This question has occupied Jean-Loup Flouest for several years. Today, he is proving how much we have underestimated the knowledge of the Celts.
The person who made this mastered all the techniques of circle cutting very well. We arrive at something like 190 circles and circle arcs to trace all the elements of this object. So there was really a great deal of conceptual work done before the piece was made, which is huge. Where could such mathematical knowledge come from in the 5th century BC in Champagne? Apparently, it came from intellectual exchanges among an entire scientific elite who frequented the Mediterranean basin. The person who comes to mind immediately is Pythagoras. In the teachings of Pythagoras, there was a geometric figure composed of the initiation numbers 8 and 27. And this is composed of 27 circles, and the background of the decoration is itself cut into 8. And so we fall square upon these elements of Pythagorean numerology. We know that the Druids, who represent the intellectual class of the Celtic world, were considered by the Latins, like Cicero, for example, as being Pythagoreans.
It was the Druids who held this knowledge. It touched upon mathematics, but also astronomy, anatomy, and philosophy. All that we know of these learned priests comes from Greek and Roman texts. The Druids preferred the oral tradition, undoubtedly, like the teacher Pythagoras, in order to allow knowledge to become continuously enriched and not grow static. Mnemonic exercise was part of the principles of a very long education. Anyone could become a Druid, on the condition that they were willing to follow a course of study that could last more than 20 years. That is why the entire scholarly work of the Celts was contained in texts that were either spoken or sung. Wisdom that has been lost forever. The archaeology work continues. New objects surface to challenge the scientists. And ever more Celtic settlements come to light. Other divinities lie hidden within the complexity of their designs. The lack of written texts means that we still do not know precisely what languages were spoken among the Celtic peoples of Europe. And it's precisely in this void left by the absence of words that the legend of the Celts lives on.